some of the same critics who were bashing Nier Automata as bimbo or calling the creator sexist. Now they're claiming, oh, we've always loved Nier Automata when comparing it to Stellar Blade. Like, who are they trying to fool? It wasn't just that either. It was also the torrent of Gamers Are Dead articles, this constant stream of just, I'd say, passive-aggressive, patronizing, and just downright dishonest reporting, doing this massive stream of absolute gaslighting to somehow persuade the wider public that there are these enemies in their midst. I couldn't stand.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers that built nerd culture. I'm your host, Pete Pischke. In last week's episode, I interviewed a journalist from the magazine Kotaku on the Gamergate 2.0 situation. And to balance things out, I brought on today writer Carlos Miguel del Callar. Carlos hails from the Philippines and is renowned for his incisive commentary on video games, entertainment, and socio-political issues. He regularly contributes to his eponymous Substack and pens long-form content for platforms like Ariel Magazine and Quillette. A veteran observer of Gamergate, Carlos penned his thoughts on the movement during its original inception way back in 2014, earning him recognition as an expert on the topic. In today's episode, we will revisit the original Gamergate, explore Carlos's coverage of the topic, and discuss the evolution of that movement. We will delve into Carlos's prediction for the future of Gamergate, and hopefully, we'll get a little glimpse into the fascinating culture of the Philippines. Carlos, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for helping me to figure out. I didn't quite nail your name, but I think I'm closer than my first take
it's all
on
right.
it. Yeah, no, Philippines is great. My stepmom, she is from the Philippines, and I remember attending my dad's wedding. Both the I don't even know what the word I'm looking for, but the dinner the night before, and then the reception after. It was basically like just a ton of Filipino women. And then each of them had like a big fat white guy for a boyfriend or husband. And it was fantastic. Loved it. A lot of fun. They're an energetic group. Definitely.
Maybe they are.
Yeah, I like my stepmom. She's a fun lady. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Carlos. What's your background? How did you get into writing?
Well, believe it or not, I actually consider writing as a sideline thing to my professional work. And I've been in the workplace for over 10 years, although for much longer, I've always been fascinated with video games and writing, like whether fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah, and it's for that reason, your alter ego. You asked that so you don't reveal your identity to the world. So that's why today we have you without camera, which is fine. Yeah, I remember finding you. I was looking on Reddit, going through the different subreddits I check out, which one of them is KIA, which those are the Gamergate people, basically, Kotaku in action. And I saw you had posted there, and I reached out because I was like, oh, it's interesting, because I remember you writing about Gamergate back in the day. So we connected, and it was so cool for you to agree to come on. What's your background with video games? Like, did you grow up with video games? You enjoy video games? Are you a gamer yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Like ever since I would say, early to mid-90s, from the moment I had access to a Famicom, or as we called it here, the family computer, it's like I've been an avid gamer. I mean, though nowadays it's mostly PC, Steam, Nintendo Switch, but I still find time to enjoy a game or two every now and then.
Yeah, no, sometimes as an adult, especially trying to balance life stuff, it's hard sometimes to find time for games. I saw this wonderful meme on Twitter the other day. It was like, I'm an adult and now I have no time for video games. And it looks at the graph and it's like sleep, work, family. And he's like, I couldn't possibly find time for video games, could I? And he eyes at the sleep and he pulls it away from the column. Which is, that pretty much does sum it up, yeah. I'm big into games too. Love video games. Have as long as I can remember. You sound like you're around my age, so you can probably remember before the 2010s, before Gamergate, none of this stuff was particularly political. All that other stuff, religion, politics, ethnicity, all that stuff, which is now such a big deal now, it really wasn't a consideration for video games, at least when I was growing up. Was it the same for you?
Well, a bit of yes and no, because here in the Philippines, it's like there was, well, back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a parallel to the moral panic stateside, if I remember correctly. Only here, it came from the older generation on the one hand, who were concerned about these toys that were seen as, just for kids and always driving them away, making them more antisocial, which in Filipino culture, here outgoing, the stereotype of the very sociable, constantly going around Filipino kid, yeah, that can be seen as problematic among the older generation. And then from the Catholic Church and from other more religious organizations who saw video games as the new thing, as something that could teach the wrong morals to children. But, well, those quietly died down as time went on.
Yeah, no, the Philippines, if people don't know, it has a huge religious population. Like, it is a very faith church-going culture. I mean, there's so many. There recently was these stories about this mega pastor in the Philippines. He got in big trouble with the law over here. But I mean, the Christianity, not just Christianity, but especially Christianity, is really big over there.
Oh yes, we're I think one of the only two Asian countries in Asia that's actually majority Christian. I mean, the other one would be East Timor, which is both surprising and at the same time not, because you're so immersed in that majority Catholic and generally Christian culture that you don't really notice until you leave the Philippines.
I can relate. I remember, because I'm LDS, more in Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. So in my teen years in high school, we had to attend what they called early morning seminary, which is basically like you go in and for an hour, you study the scriptures with a guide in like a classroom setting almost. I can remember, this is like 2007, and someone had a talk at church, like general conference. So it's like the whole church, not just like our little ward or branch, but like the whole wide organization, talking about video games. And I came to seminary that Monday, and then I was lectured by one of my fellow students. See, they were saying this is why video games are bad. Video games are terrible. You shouldn't play them. If you were a good, faithful Mormon, you would be playing those video games, which is, I mean, all of that is so laughable now because everything's flipped. We flipped from the religious people being the zealots to now to the more progressive, non-religious people being the zealots. But I mean, from my point of view, it feels like it's musical chairs, right? But the game has largely stayed the same.
Oh, that is true. And I would actually wager that some of those people right now were probably raised in an ironically similar background, like my guess is probably very religious backgrounds. But the biggest irony, though, is that even when they left their, I guess, very dogmatic upbringings behind, they never actually left the substrate, the underlying foundations as to why they left in the first place. So they may not be religious now, but the fervor is still there.
Yeah, definitely. You feel that a ton out here in the States. There, you can definitely find a strong trace back from, Puritanism to maybe attitudes today, whether it's like health or drugs or some moral political issue. People get really, really into it. And
oh yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting. So how did you get yourself involved in Gamergate? I mean, by the way, what made you start wanting to write regularly like you do?
Well, I would say that the writing thing, it was more tangential than anything. Like, I've always been a guy who's been inclined to write. Like, I've always liked writing, whether as fiction or writing, commentary, things about what's happening outside, whether it's my personal hobbies or, general issues that catch my attention. But in the case of Gamergate in particular, it happened like gradually. It didn't happen like on that one fateful day in 2014.
Yeah. Were you reading like things like Otaku? Like were you like reading a lot of games press prior to
Well,
Gamergate?
I mean, I used to read quite a bit of IGN, some Rock Paper Shotgun. Even I actually have some old issues of PC Gamer lying around. It's it's just that as time went on, it's even before Gamergate, there were stirrings. There was this foreshadowing, as it were. It started off with like these very pretentious articles about the need to move on from games or to elevate gaming as art. And then Anita Sarkeesian, I think she needs no introduction to the gaming crowd, but let's just say she began painting this entire narrative of gamers as misogynist, sexist, what have you. And then, of course, you realize that's not really true at all, even here. And then, yeah.
No, I hear you because it was like you mentioned IGN. IGN prior to 2014, it would regularly feature like models, gals in bikinis, like cosplay chicks. And you could find that kind of content not just on IGN, you could find it on a whole bunch of gaming websites. I mean, that kind of stuff just kind of went hand in hand with gaming for a lot of people. It was like, it's like games, fast cars, hot women. It's so funny because I look back now and there's so much moralizing, and it does make me chuckle a little bit because I do remember how it used to be, and it is a little laughable that when you see some of these outlets making some of the claims they do today once you know their history.
Oh, absolutely. And when you think about it in hindsight, there was actually foreshadowing here in the Philippines. It's like long before Gamergate, there was this very popular local publication called Games Master Philippines. It's like this local branch of that British gaming mag. For a while, it was very popular. It approached gaming from a Filipino perspective, which was at the time an absolute rarity. The problem was, sometime in around 2006, they began sharing this one game called Terror Wars NY Invasion, which they kept touting as it is geared for a wide audience, for Filipino audiences, because it's using the same engine as No One Lives Forever 2, so it's readily available to the masses. And then there was a lot of promotions, and then when the game came out, it was absolute trash. As in, I can share you some references right now so you have an idea of the absolute horror. Yep, this is basically what was being touted as top-tier gameplay, and this was developed by a Filipino studio.
What year was this game?
This was 2006, and believe it or not, this was actually highly touted. It was promoted as, out of Filipino pride. It was the usual nationalistic stuff. But then it was found out that the publishers were actually closely colluding with the magazine. So there was this backroom unethical collusion that, well, people started catching attention to. And eventually, when one person, if I'm not mistaken, and who's currently an artist on ArtStation right now, actually called them out, the editors actually posted his email address. So this was literally doxing before doxing was cool. And then it destroyed the magazine's reputation, right? Almost immediately. But at the time, it was seen as, it's a local Filipino thing. Like, no one would probably catch on to it until, Gamergate happened.
Interesting. So that's kind of like a good example of like the ethics in journalism concern, but regional and before Gamergate, before 2014, and all that came together.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't just that either. It was also the torrent of Gamers Are Dead articles, this constant stream of just, I'd say, passive-aggressive, patronizing, and just downright dishonest reporting. It's like, it wasn't enough that they were basically painting a broad swath of gamers, no matter where they were from, as, these bigoted right-wing white American stereotypes. It's like, where did this come from? And then you had people like Sarkeesian, you had people from the games media basically covering each other, circling the wagons, doing this massive stream of absolute gaslighting to somehow persuade the wider public that there are these enemies in their midst, that somehow they had to be squashed for gaming to move to progress. And I couldn't stand.
It is interesting though, because I think the games media is very Western centric, at least the ones that I've been exposed to. And it's interesting that even though all this stuff was, it was coming out of places like San Francisco and New York, it was affecting people all the way out in the Philippines. So that we Americans especially, we are very American centric. We don't really think of the countries outside our orbit, which is too bad. But it is interesting to me that all that stuff that was happening online was also being seen in places like the Philippines.
Oh yes, I would say it's partly because it's the American heritage and Filipino culture. It's like 40 years, as the old saying goes here, over 3 centuries in the convent, 40 years in Hollywood. Yeah, American colonial rule can do that, but it is what it is. So we're this mix of East and West. We have American influence. We get a lot of American stuff, just as we get a lot of stuff from Taiwan, Korea, Japan.
Oh yeah, no. So you have your country has a good branch to both Japanese culture and American culture. So you got both arms of the game industry then.
Oh yes. So it kind of gives you this wider perspective on things. So when you have these game journals, these people who claim to be the voice of the gaming industry, not just in the West, but internationally, talking about these white bigots or gamers as these, white men hiding in their basements as if they're like these walking stereotypes from South Park. It's like, that was never true at all.
Yeah, definitely, because gaming isn't just enjoyed in the United States. It's enjoyed globally by a great many people who are not Caucasian. Which I don't know if anyone I don't think they really thought that way. But you brought up the example of the Filipino magazine that got in trouble with game ethics, and I think it's people like to say that's so trite, but I think that is if anything that came out of the original GG was useful, I think on that point it was, which is why I think it was the reason why so many people got canceled over it. We on the show we had Alex McCree, who was the founder of the Escapist magazine. He basically got pushed out of his own organization because he said, look, I'm not pro Gamergate, I'm not anti Gamergate, but if people want to talk about it on the Escapist forums, that's okay with me. I think conversations about ethics and journalism are always good to have. And it was just that very milquetoast, middle of the road opinion. It just destroyed his life, and he was pretty much just pushed out of working at dues altogether. Now he's working tabletop. He's got some really big things going on there, which is really exciting for him. But it was that one point that I think, and this is the reason why I think it was attacked so harshly as it was, because it was at least in part true, that there were concerns about ethics, about, well, if I go to your site and you're reviewing, Command and Conquer 3, and do I trust to review if the site I'm reading is just plastered with ads for the Command and Conquer series? And that's like a fair question to ask, right? I mean, you should, if you're a journalist, you have to have, well, hey, we have editorial, we have no control over that, we're totally separate. But that's not the answer they gave. No, instead they says, well, why are you noticing that, you man baby? You terrible person, go back in your hole.
Oh God, yeah, I actually remember that as it happened. It's just that as time went on, also, it was just that instead of trying to claim that everything was fine, they'll do things like either we have reviewed ourselves and we have done nothing wrong, or B, completely ignore the problem entirely. And then it's partly because of that you have like homebrew organizations or homebrew initiatives like Deep Freeze, which, if not mistaken, was actually is still run by an Italian named Bone Golem.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like, monitoring unethical behavior, keeping tabs on journalists and editors with either very sketchy track records or like being unusually close to certain developers, or they're promoting developers or some variation thereof. But the thing is, for some, that's considered too dangerous. It's like you do not want to put that stuff out to light.
I mean, to be fair to the games journalists, I mean, that industry came out of the hobbyist press. It's relatively smaller than other industries relative to size. Like, there are way more people in sports media than there are in like games media. And the way that culture works and journalism often works, and this is probably true in the Philippines also, it's very much about who you know, working with editors, finding partners to work with you. So it's easy to fall in the trap of, oh, I'm just going to do this thing for this one buddy of mine. This is something like Nate Grayson got in trouble for. Oh, I have, or I forget the other name, but they're like, oh, I have this roommate. They came out with this little indie game. It wouldn't hurt to cover it. I guess to some extent that's fine. The problem is if it goes much farther than that, it can lead to big problems. And if you are going to do this, hey, I'm covering my friend, you should say, hey, by the way, this person is my friend. I think this game is great, but I might be a little biased. But for whatever reason, at least at that time, it seemed like most outlets didn't even want to go and do that much, which really wasn't a lot to ask, and pretty much in any other part of journalism would have happened.
Exactly. It's like, and part of the other problem, I'd say, was that it also bled out of, it wasn't just in the gaming sphere, as it were. As you already described, even in 2014, games journalism was already starting to show cracks. It was also in the wider legacy media, as it were. Like, you were starting to see many of the similar hit pieces coming from The Guardian, even I think Time Magazine. It's like you have these major publications, even the New York Times, respected international publications that have had decades, if not, over 100 years behind their name, suddenly doing the same thing. And people, of course, will try to defend them, saying that, oh, they're just doing due diligence, or simply the brand recognition alone is enough to somehow silence criticism.
Yeah, without realizing that by using media like that, to use it like a hammer, they're putting they're scratching up the reliability and the legacy of those, like the luster on sites like IGN. When they go through something like they just had a thing going on with IGN France, that they made some comments about the Stellar Blade game, which is this,
that watch.
yeah, and they made some comment about this looks like a character designed by someone that's never seen a real woman, and then it turns out, well, actually, the character designer is a woman, the model is an actual woman. It's like, oh, yeah. When that happens, though, it does. It takes a little luster off the media, and you have sometimes it's not very much, but you just have a bit of fewer people who trust the source. And the problem is you do that over and over and over again, and soon enough, then you have no shine at all. It's all gone. No one trusts you. Which I kind of think is where Kotaku is now. And I like Kotaku, and I said that last week, but there are very few people, I think, that will rely upon Kotaku unless it has the most strictest of receipts.
Yeah, I don't blame you in that respect. And, on my end, even beforehand, it's like I was already becoming pretty sketchy regarding Kotaku, because I'm not sure if you remember this particular bit, but back in the day, they were incredibly avidly against JRPGs and Japanese gaming in general, because they were supposedly problematic, they were sexist, they were behind the times. And mind you, this was before 2014. And I think they were also, while they weren't exactly on the same page as Phil Fish, the one who said outright, your game sucks to a Japanese developer.
Mm-hmm.
They were basically touting his horn. And at the time, they thought that they felt comfortable enough because it was the apparent consensus. It's like, if you repeat it so many times, that eventually people will just buy into it. And yet, fast forward like 5 to 10 years later, they are singing praises to Japanese gaming now, relatively speaking. I mean, up until Resident Evil 4 Remake, where they started doing the same patronizing angle, or with the Final Fantasy, where they kept claiming, no, 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 gaming has to be representative.
Yeah, last year there was when Final Fantasy 16 was coming out, there was the story that they were saying people are describing this as Japanese role-playing game, but we never used that term because when we used to hear that coming from Western outlets, it was always an insult, which is like, to me, that's crazy, but they're not wrong. That was how it was with so many people. I can remember enjoying those games in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And it was like, oh, you're playing this game, what a weirdo, all the, I don't know.
It's amazing. It's like many of the same people who over a decade ago were basically dishing on Japanese video games, including the the people behind X-Play. Like, some of the stuff that they were showing there, it went beyond mere jokes. Like, they were, let's just say, incredibly spiteful. And yet, fast forward to more recently, like the early 2020s, and many of the same people are either pretending they never said that or claiming that, oh, we've always loved Japanese video games. Or if you want a more recent example, you have stories about how some of the same critics who were bashing Nier Automata as, bimbo, or calling the creator sexist, now they're claiming, oh, we've always loved Nier Automata, when comparing it to Stellar Blade. Like, who are they trying to fool?
I don't know. That is one of the weird things that I was reading on your Substack that you do observe, is that many of the same people that were involved the first time around, that were part of the Gamers Are Dead articles, or the people commenting on, are these exact same people 10 years later, which is, I mean, that's a little fascinating to me. I don't know if that really means anything. I just think that's an interesting curiosity about the situation.
Actually, you're more right than you realize, because some of these same people, it's like when they were exposed, like some of them basically had their careers ruined. I mean, not necessarily at the hand of Gamergaters, but basically by their own hand. But the problem is, some of these people, they found a different angle, as it were. Instead of basically going for an increasingly exposed, increasingly scrutinized games journal scene, they shifted more towards gaming consultancy, something that is so behind the scenes that unless, if you ask people like 1 to 2 years ago what Sweet Baby Inc. was, no, most people probably wouldn't bat an eye, or they would have no idea what you're talking about. And I think that's the idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good shifting point. And you have a lot of great commentary in 2014. I when you look back and try to figure out what was going on back then, you have a lot of good stuff on it that people should definitely check out. What is the connection point between, and you were kind of just talking about, between 2014, the original Gamergate, and whatever we're calling today's thing, what GG 2.0, whatever you want to call it? What's the connecting link?
I would say the connecting link is that apart from some of the same people being involved, it's also that many of the same issues that were discussed in the original Gamergate are still there. It's just that the focus has shifted from gaming journalism itself more towards within the industry, because some of these people are attempting to make inroads. They're trying to somehow exploit their connections, assert their authority, as it were, and essentially get their piece of the pie, screw the consequences. But at the same time, there's also another interesting parallel. It's their tactics. I mean, change a few words here and slightly tweak the framing, and it's almost fundamentally identical to the tactics they used back in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, it's very subversive. It's very much, let's try to get inside these institutions, change them from the inside out, get a bunch of our buddies in, and flip them. I mean, it's the same pattern we've seen in so many things. Inside, outside gaming, unfortunately.
It's not just that. It's also, that extends also to how they're trying to basically cover for themselves. It's like resorting to the same rhetoric. It's like, of course, adjusted to 2020's lingo. So instead of, it's racist, sexist, homophobic, you have to point it out all the time. Now these are far right. These are reactionaries. These are backward gamers who can't adjust to change. Basically, there's this tinge of triumphalism, tinge of hubris that they feel that they've already won, so they could just do more or less the exact same use the exact same rhetoric they used back in 2014 because they think, oh, we've already won, or oh, we already have this in the bag. What can possibly go wrong?
Yeah, it is odd. There is a weird connection between GG the first time around and whatever this thing is. Like when you look at like Sweet Baby Games and like the connection with like Zoe Quinn, you have Eileen Holocaust, who's the sister of Alec Holocaust, who was canceled from life. Let's just put it that way. He did Night in the Woods, which is a fabulous game, really great. And it is weird, but there is some kind of sort of connection between what was going on back then and today. Have you played the new Suicide Squad? Have you played any of these games that Sweet Baby Inc. have worked on, Carlos?
I don't think I have, but I did actually do research into what those games were while doing the articles. I'm always considered like taking due diligence. Like even if you haven't played the game or the games in question, the least you can do is do the legwork or try to at least get as good a read as possible rather than, making stuff up out of thin air.
Yeah, no, which is good. Like Suicide Squad is a great example, I think, of, and I could talk about the extent to which I think consulting actually has to do with all this, but it's a great example of things that gamers are bothered in modern AAA gaming. It's like, this is not a very good game, and it's being given a luster because it says all the right things about all the right people. And it's just weird. You play it, and it's like Flash, Batman, Superman, all the male characters, they have to be taken out in very humiliating ways. At one point, one of the characters urinates on the corpse of Flash, who just tried to save all the protagonist's lives. And then Wonder Woman dies, but she dies in this heroic, triumphant kind of way. And then you can even read like the
lore.
The lore, like the glossary in game, and then it's like every entry. Oh, this male superhero, he's terrible. What a loser! And then it gets to Wonder Woman. Oh, Wonder Woman is amazing. She's fantastic. We all love Wonder Woman. And it's like you see so much of that over and over again. It's kind of hard to ignore. Not that every claim that GG 2.0 has is correct or anything, but it's just like one of those things. It's like it's there, it's happening. Maybe it's hard to describe as to why, but something is up.
You're not wrong. You see, even beforehand, like, this wasn't Sweet Baby's first rodeo. Like, there was Alan Wake 2, there was Spider-Man 2, which at the time, like, most people didn't really notice, or if they did, they couldn't quite put their finger on it. Because at that time, like, there wasn't really a smoking gun, there were no glaring signs. Like, even that Alan Wake 2 article on gamesindustry.biz about, game developer, regarding, Sweet Baby's involvement, particularly in how they helped design the co-protagonist for that game. Well, there was just enough plausible deniability that you can't really pin the blame squarely on Sweet Baby Inc. But with Suicide Squad, on the other hand, it was already laid bare, which wasn't helped at all by the poor gameplay and just the general lack of polish.
Yeah, half the writing credits are Sweet Baby Inc. people, including the founder. Like there's like 12 people who worked on the game, and like six of the writers are Sweet Baby Inc., including its founder, which is like it's right there in bold. That you cannot deny.
Exactly. And the thing is, some of those were former Rocksteady devs. So you have this like extra layer of like intertwining. You could almost say collusion, as it were. But that's not really discussed, and anyone trying to bring that up would be called a bigot. Because somehow such an otherwise tiny thing wouldn't really bat an eye.
Yeah. To some extent, like there's some games where it's like they'll do race, like one character race swap. I think Thor Ragnarok does that. Other games, they might go farther. Alan Wake 2, I actually liked Alan Wake 2, but I can see what people are saying where there's certain changes were made. I think what's kind of true is when the games are good, no one really cares, and when the games are bad and this stuff isn't it, that's when they notice.
Yeah, I think there's also this peculiar tendency that each subsequent game that with Baby Big Ink has been involved with, it's like you notice those flaws more and more, especially when it gives the impression that more attention was placed on their quote-unquote recommendations than, actually fixing the rest of the game, or, seeing how that input meshes with the rest of the end result. It's like you can have the most diverse thing in the world, the most diverse cast in the world. You can have all the checkpoints marked, but if the gameplay itself doesn't match up with all of that, then you just end up with a mess. You don't end up with a good game.
No, very true. Two recent games I've really enjoyed: Dragon's Dogma 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. They do have quite a few black NPCs, racial minorities, et cetera, but at no point in either game do you ever feel like you're lectured or you're being attacked. If I was told, "Hey, Sweet Baby Inc. worked in the game," and I'd be like, "Well, I guess it's not that big of a deal." But to my evidence, I don't think they've worked on it because those two games are not American. Those are Japanese-made games. And I think where we're seeing Sweet Baby Inc.'s hand, it seems to be in Western AAA studios. Do you think there's something about AAA in the Western market versus Japan? Since you are in the Philippines and since you have a good sense of both in parts of the industry.
I mean, I would say that the AAA scenes in Japan and the West, they have their own particular issues. They have their own particular strengths. But in the case of the Anglophone Western AAA scene, there are some major issues there. Like you have on the one hand, essentially a handful of consultants, their industry connections, their quote-unquote allies among the developers who are basically trying to get hold of, the usual, the DI money, your ESG money, because they think that somehow it means more funding for them, more influence for them, not necessarily because they actually believe in what they're actually touting. But rather, it's like, it doesn't matter if the game is if the end result is actually good or not. They think that somehow if they hit all the check marks, it means that, this game will sell because it hits all the marks. It means more funding for them. But at the end of the day, well, that's not guaranteed. And they're basically playing with fire.
Yeah, these budgets for these games are so huge. I mean, an Ubisoft title, it's like a little small mid-sized Midwest town. It's like 10,000 people or more on some of these games. It's crazy how big these things are. So it makes some sort of sense to me where they're like, we've invested so much money into this thing, more money than anyone is ever going to see in their life. It's like, we're going to take every possible advantage we can get. So if we can get even just a little sprinkling of that ESG, what do we care? We're the corporate execs. We don't care if the NPCs they shoot are white, black, Hispanic. Just change it. Just change it. Just change it all. We don't care.
I mean, the only other drawback to that particular issue is, well, ESG and DEI funds aren't infinite, because at the end of the day, investors still want their money back. They still want their money's worth. And with rising interest rates and this general perception that ESG and DEI aren't exactly profitable or desirable for investors in general, well, let's just say that money is going to be harder to come by, and it's going to be harder to justify having to somehow change games or to have a checklist to comply with those DEI standards. Standards, mind you, that aren't exactly guaranteed to sell at all. So you already have essentially increasingly a lose-lose situation, but they've been in it for too long. Like, they put too much that they can't exactly admit any wrongdoing.
Now, to be fair to the companies, I mean, there are plenty of true believers. The games industry pulls from a lot of progressive lefty type people. Many people feel that this is the way they want to go. I mean, even if that's kind of my big criticism of the GG 2.0 folks, is that they are saying that, if Sweet Baby, for example, Suicide Squad, if Sweet Baby Inc. hadn't been involved, then that game wouldn't have been as terrible, or you wouldn't have the way it treats its characters like I described earlier, like Wonder Woman versus the Flash. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I think that much of Western culture, especially where artsy people are involved, they are increasingly going to these far left themes and ideas. I don't think you have to jangle the keys in front of the ESG money. I mean, I think play them will still go that direction, but that's just my guess.
Well, I would say that I think if it wasn't Sweet Baby Inc., it could have been any other consultant pushing similar ideas that people would have noticed. I think at the end of the day, people would still be left in the dark if, and I'm taking this from a devil's advocate perspective, if they had done the most economical thing, namely, they kept quiet about it. They did not make a big deal about it. They didn't go, didn't go after Cabrudos, Sweet Baby Inc. detected or whatnot. The entire issue would have blown over just like that, because it would have been a lot easier to dismiss the critics as, oh, those far right culture war bigots that shuts much more easily. But because for whatever reason, whether it's ego or somehow hubris, they had to somehow go after Cabrudos. Like, it wasn't enough to somehow say, oh, that's not what we do, and leave it at that. They had to silence him. They had to attempt to ruin him, and it only drew more eyes. And we all know how it, went from there.
Yeah, and there's another situation just last week with what is it, Black Girl Gamers, which started out as just like a Facebook group for Black women who play games and will play with other Black women. I guess somehow part of it became an actual company that actually does consultancy work, kind of similar to the Sweet Baby Inc. And the controversy is Gothics, who is okay to do YouTuber. No offense to her. I haven't watched a lot of her show. And she is now in trouble because she was saying that she had been kicked out of the group, and they're saying, well, no, she lied because she wasn't actually kicked out. She just left of her own accord. But then to prove their point, they bring out receipts, and these are like messages from like a Discord in 2017. It wasn't even their group. It was a different Discord. This is like a defunct group. It's not even their receipt. It's someone else's receipts. I'm like, you guys keeping around receipts for, how, 27, 7, 3. So you're holding on to receipts for 7 years. Like, you're holding on to this just in case one day maybe you can use this against her. That doesn't really speak well to your case.
Not at all. I mean, it does show their true colors. It's like, even among themselves, it's like even among people who are, essentially their coworkers, their friends, their quote-unquote family, it's like they have to find something to use against them. The moment somehow they're seen as the enemy, the moment they start realizing that something's wrong here, or maybe we shouldn't do this, or they realize what the actual grift is. But whether because, out of self-preservation or this belief that somehow because they are Black or because they are this ideology, they cannot do any wrong, they see no problem with it whatsoever.
Yeah, they become stuck in a monoculture. I think that's what this story seems to share the most with GG 1.0 is that aspect. It's you are not surrounding yourself with enough people who come from a different background, who have a different worldview. It's just people who think like you, act like you, and you don't really want that to change. But that leads into big problems, because then you get stuck in things like this. And, it's so crazy that, games journalism, if you have any not progressive tendencies at all, you have no chance to really get a foothold in that industry, which is terrible. And at the same time, we had people like this, the lawyer, who was the official lawyer for Pokemon Go and Nintendo, what is that? What's the Niantic? Niantic, they're the people that do Pokemon Go. I think
Mhm.
I think I have that right.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah,
said
yeah.
he said on Twitter, when people are like, "Well, HR is a problem that they're keeping these people out." He's like, "No, HR is great. But they're there to prevent people like you working in the industry." And I'm just thinking, this is not helpful. This is not actually helping your case. This is doing the opposite. This is making it worse. But the problem is they're
Exactly.
stuck in this bubble, this monoculture. They can't seem to understand why people are like, this place is so toxic. It purposely is toxic, so it keeps all other people out. And we don't really like that.
I mean, when you put it that way, there is an ironic parallel between that and how GG1 gradually, morphed into. Because over time, that same polyglot group of, diverse backgrounds, gamers that were united over, criticism against games journalism and desire for ethics, and like generally generally just want to be left alone. They just want to play video games. But gradually over time, it's like a combination of factors, whether it's, outside parties, grifters, culture warriors hoping to recruit people for their own particular causes or whatnot. GG 1.0, to an extent, became a monoculture. It's like it basically became yet another voice, another streaming voice in the culture war. And in a way, it like even as the original Gamergate achieved its purpose, there's this other parallel development of a perpetual outrage, a perpetual siege mentality. Like this is not what I signed up for.
I agree, and I never consider myself GG officially in that way, but I agree, because it's like even the stuff like Mark Grubbs, who, by the way, was a fabulous developer on the original World of Warcraft, but now it seems like he kind of wants to be a culture war influencer, which I mean, hey, if that's what you want to do, you could do it, hats off to you, but not necessarily always helpful. And, he was going after people who basically have done nothing wrong. There was one point they were going after Niche Gamer, another point, I am drawing a blank. They were going after Bellar Games, which is a mix of these guys from Ireland and like Finland, and they're just
Bellar. Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Well,
And they wouldn't harm a fly. They don't bother anyone, and they're like, well, you did when you talked about Kotaku, you didn't talk about this, that. You guys are being, they don't say the word, but basically you are being disloyal. I'm like, they cover a lot of this stuff. They just did it that time. You don't have to do it every time. It's okay. But you go to places like I'll fish up. But you go to places like the KII Reddit, and then they're like, they fall through. Oh, yes, that's right. Why is Niche Gamer being so bad? What's wrong? How much is Bell? This is an actual thing I saw getting ready for this. I was reading KIA. This is an actual thing. How much did Bellator get paid to support Kotaku? That's a ridiculous premise. That's ridiculous. Kotaku doesn't even have the money for it, let alone that they would be so smart and creative as to pay YouTube off. That would actually be an improvement, Kotaku, if you were using for some good guerrilla marketing. But it's beyond ridiculousness at some point, and it's hard. It is hard because I think in any group, in any culture, like you were saying, you can get stuck in this bubble or this hole or this place where you're comfortable, and things that are patently ridiculous, you no longer, for whatever reason, you can no longer see it. And I think in a healthy society, when you have inputs from multiple sides coming in, they can say, hey, there's a giant bug on your nose. You should move it. Get rid of that bug. And when it's just your buddies and you're all facing the same direction, well, no one sees the bugs. You got who knows crawling on your face. That's my terrible analogy. I'll move it to you now.
It's all no worries. I would say this was about Bellar. Like I have my own particular issues with him, not necessarily just over this particular issue. Maybe because he has this other reputation of generally being, I would say, I guess, capitalizing on the latest drama and outrage for the week. But that's neither here nor there. I guess all I'm going to say, though, is this. It's like if YouTubers, commentators are not obliged to discuss every major hot topic or every major event or drama, what have you. That being said, if they do have to do so, whatever that might be, the least they can do is be as fair as possible, cover as much ground as possible. So that way, when people start going after them, they have something to fall back on, or they can say, pardon my French, we've covered our ass.
Oh, and people saying, well, the reason why they're so hesitant to cover this topic is because they don't want to get in trouble with people. And that might be true to some extent. I mean, it's something, even as a writer, and you're covering a topic, part communications, like, what are you saying? What are you not saying? Who's the audience you're trying to speak to? And what are people who are outside your audience going to think? And any good communicator is thinking of those things. It's part of the equation to some extent. And then you have to decide, is what I'm talking about, if I change it for the audience that I'm not reaching for, if I'm going to hide things because I don't want to offend people, does that hurt the overall message? And really, for an audience member, that's up to you to feel if that person made that decision or not. But in my opinion, Bellular was not doing it in that case. That's just me. But I mean, like Niche Gamer was saying, they're like, look, we want to, we're a website. You're familiar with Niche Gamer, right, Carlos? I think you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Their point was that, look, I know all of you people want to talk about Sweet Baby Inc. all the time. I know you want to cover it, but we can't cover it in the same way you would like, because then we'll lose access to publishers, because the people that are at these publishers, these PR people, that they will definitely cancel us and we won't be able to get access. And then they didn't say this part, but this is kind of like the truth that's not being said. I mean, we'll go out of business, which, I mean, they're not wrong. Unfortunately, having worked in news, it's like, look, that's how it is with game reviews. People like to read the reviews day of or days before. They do not so much read them days after. And that's just the truth of it. It's like hard economics. You're working against it. Now, I wish Niche Gamer is being honest, but I wish places like Kotaku would be honest in that same way. Like, that would be refreshing. Like, actually, no, we have to put out outrage bait, because that's what keeps the lights on.
I mean, like, in a case of Niche Gamer, I mean, I'm actually more partial to them, admittedly, and they could have handled it much better. It's like, I think it's more indicative of just how increasingly polarized and just angry the overall atmosphere has become. Because when you have essentially people acting in bad faith, people throwing accusations of bigot, reactionary, racist, or what have you, and you have the added layer of genuine bad actors, like, for example, those consultants who are constantly pushing these frankly dishonest, if not outright dangerous ideas, like including basically glorified racial segregation in the workplace as, perfectly normal and as a safe space. It's, after a while, that is going to basically bleed into everything else. So even if you're acting in good faith, how sure can you be that they really are? Or are you sure that, it's not just an SJW in disguise, or, he must be gaslighting me? It's that lack of trust, this perpetual sense that unless you are part of the group already, you must be an enemy. But it's that kind of thinking, though, it didn't work with the first Gamergate in its later stages. And in the case of Gamergate 2, you can see the parallels happening right now, though I'm not as worried that it'll evolve into the same cacophony.
Yeah. I'm curious, how much of this social justice, this wokeness, how much all that stuff gets down over to you? Like, how much does it, because America, probably our top export is culture. How much of this stuff then gets to places like the Philippines? And what do you guys think of all this kind of thing?
Well, I can only speak from the perspective of my own and probably my immediate community. It's just that looking at America from the outside, it's like, it looks crazy. It's like, you're like, no offense to the Americans, but you can come off as generally wound up or perpetually angry. It's like, rather than, live and let live, or at the very least agree to disagree, it's like you have people instead looking for the worst possible interpretation of something as innocuous as, I like sand, or I like this game. and somehow interpreting that as either a racist thing or some dog whistle for communism or something. It's like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Like you need to chill. But that's one thing. On the other hand, here there is also a lot of American cultural influence here that I see. Whether it's it could be anything from American pop culture. We get a lot of that to political thing like local politics. Also, it's like we have our fair share of leftists. We have our fair share of hard nationalists. You name it, we probably have it.
Mm-hmm. I am amazed. I just find it so interesting to talk to people who are not, in the northern hemisphere, in the Anglosphere, and what they think on all this. Because some of the stuff, it feels ridiculous to me. But I've never, sometimes they're like, is my thermometer off? Do I have this right? So to hear people from the outside and their perspective, what happens is always good to hear. You said earlier in our discussion that you felt that GG 1.0 had been successful. So how in your view, how was it successful, and then how would you compare that to what's happening now?
I would say that it helped basically shed a light on what was initially seen by some as a rot within like media reporting, games journalism. However, mocked it was back then, was actually exposed for what it actually was, and it basically showed that yes, you can make them accountable, because not long after all those gamers that hit pieces, after the constant outcry, there was an actual push among at least some publications to make a more visible sense, a more visible ethical policy, as it were. And at the same time, though, these things had a trickle-down effect that eventually led to Gawker's implosion. Granted, I mean, Peter Thiel also had a big hand in that one, but the constant criticism of, Kotaku and other affiliates in Gawker eventually helped bring down particular giants. But as time went on, though, it's like you had that sense of, okay, now that it wasn't enough that we won this one. No. We had to basically batten out the hatches. We had to basically hold the line against the constant tide of wokeness. And over time, at least among the more cynical and among the more pessimistic, there's a sentiment that Gamergate lost, because instead of, seeing their enemies crushed before them, seeing wokeness defeated once and for all, there's this kind of like negative feedback loop of, this new woke drama, or this game has something deemed woke, and whatever, anything one angry gamer posted after 2016, that one was horrendously embarrassing.
Yeah, my buddy Tony, he was one of the writers of One Angry Gamer, and I've talked about this with him, and it is interesting that shift that happened. But you make a good point where like people there wasn't a clear understanding of what victory looked like, and I think this is kind of here today. But both sides, at least in the West, have this really bad. Sorry, there's like a glare coming out this back window, so if I look really shiny,
it's okay.
That's what it is.
It's okay.
They couldn't really figure out really what the terms of victory were, and I think the big problem today is, and this is a kind of scary. Like this is actually this worries me, and it probably should. But I get the feeling in today's culture and the culture war that neither side, at least from politics, will be happy till the other one is gone. They want total victory, complete and total victory, where the other side has been atomized to the point that they have no influence in the culture. Which, by the way, is unrealistic. Neither side has any chance of ever having that happen. But if those are your terms, this thing never turns off, and sadly, scarily, it justifies bigger and worse things to try to get there. But that's my observation. I hope I'm wrong.
I mean, I get where you're coming from, because it doesn't help either how those trying to silence criticism of Sweet Baby Inc. and this kind of like culture around it, including the media, have tried escalating the game by let's drag in government-backed studies, and that'll prove that these gamers are hotbeds for white supremacy. It's like I personally don't believe that it's going to spark this great jackfruit march that'll take your games away. honestly, I find the idea that people are using the fear, the moral panic, the outrage to somehow prop up their own academic credentials or get government grant money much more much more tasteless, but more to the point. I would say that Gamergate, I guess Mark Kern would say that one of the biggest mistakes Gamergate 1 ever made was that there was this push. There was this I guess one song of if we somehow align ourselves with outsiders interested in joining the fight, we would, win. The mistake though was that many thought that conservative ink, the Dating Wire or more, or the likes of, MIlo would be that answer. But it became clear over time that they were just in it to push their own culture war agenda. And they saw Gamergate as little more than one step to fighting the culture war. Like, it wasn't enough for them to, say, oh, we just want to be left alone or we just want to play video games. Like, for them, the victory condition had to be, we must win the culture war our way. And we can see how that can dramatically alter the overall discourse.
Yeah, no, that's very sage insight. I'm glad to hear that because that was kind of my feeling on it too. There was this discussion about people who are like, well, we really care about games, so it would be awesome if people like Matt Walsh took up this cross and walked beside us. And I was like, no, that's a stupid idea. Don't do that. It doesn't work. This comes from me, not from gaming or even politics. It's come from working in the disability community. I've been a disability reporter. I've been a chronic pain advocate. Those are issues I care about on a personal and professional level. And a big problem we have with the disability issues is there are plenty of them, at least here in the United States. Philippines, I don't know what you guys have. That's your problem. And it's like you go to these organizations, NCIL, you go to any of the big national organizations, like we have these big issues like medical freedom to access, pain medication or whatever medication people need for their disability. And they're like, yeah, we care about that. And then we're like, well, then why don't you do anything? And they're like, well, we'll get to it. And you look at where they put their priorities, and you attend these conferences, and they're like, I just lost my mind. This is probably 2019, where the big issue was like equitable appearances of disabled people on TV and movies. What they cared about was making sure that there were enough people in wheelchairs in films. I'm like, I guess it's nice. Not a very high priority, though. And the problem is with these organizations, it would be every political issue under the sun. So on the progressive slate. So it wouldn't be disabilities like, yeah, it's on, but it's with everything else. LGBT, all the equity stuff, environmentalism, all of it. And the problem with that is it choked out actually any action whatsoever that would ever happen on disability issues. And this is the problem with coalitions and coalition building is often you do agree to do this, but the other people in your coalition never have the intent to follow through. And that's why when I was looking, I was like, look, you don't want to bring in people like Matt Walsh because they don't actually care if you get to play games or not. They could care less. And if the rubber meets the road and they have to decide between what's good for them and what's good for you and what you care about, they're choosing, they're choosing mano a mano. They're choosing me. And that's what happened. And I think what you were saying, Carlos, is so on point because I'm not GG, but I was surprised and happy to see that actually in this culture war event that they chose, actually, no, we will keep this in-house. And that was good. That was a positive. Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would say there is one major difference between GG1 and GG2 is there is much more awareness of, grifters and outside players, the proverbial vultures circling around because then now just as back then, you have a lot of people just, hoping to somehow join in to bring Gamergaters back to their fold or to somehow find the proverbial smoking gun that, OMG, these are the actual biggest we're looking for. Or in the case of a certain Sargon of Akkad, if Gamergaters were to fight my way, or if they somehow stopped with, I just want to play video games instead of completely changing the culture because, liberalism is just wokeness diluted or whatever. It's obviously people are catching on to the fact that they're not really interested in video games or, I don't know, the ideas of Gamergate, and more interested in pushing their own agendas, pushing their own grift, their own whatever. So you had a lot of pushback from Matt Walsh this time. You had a lot of pushback, even from the likes of, say, Ian Miles Shaw, who, mind you, previously defended Matt Walsh not just over this, but on how anime and manga are degenerate. It's like, when you think about it now, it's like, it's astonishing how they managed to slip in the first time around.
What are there other lessons that you hope people take away from this, if per se? And I don't think this will be, because it's the internet economy completely relies upon. But maybe one of the lessons is maybe outrage has its use, but it's finite. It can only be used so far. Like you were saying, like Ian Miles Chong, who, by the way, you do have this in common. He is not from the Philippines. He lives in Malaysia, but he also likes to write about U.S.-centric stuff. And people always hold that against him. And I've never met him in person, but I've talked to him before online, back when I did some writing for the Post Millennial. I mean, I thought he was, a nice enough guy. And if he wants to, talk crap about the United States, I don't see why he can't do it also. I mean, we're already doing it. I don't know why it's so much worse when he does, but
I guess in the case of people like Sean, it's not so much that they're outsiders talking about American politics. It's more like they're basically using an existing topic, like, say, video games or whatnot, as a platform to push for American politics. And mind you, American politics that he has, the likes of Chong have no real, investment in. It's like he lives in Malaysia, but he's basically covering for Matt Walsh, the Daily Wire, for politics and ideals that won't really affect him in any meaningful way in Malaysia. There's a fundamental difference.
Good point. I hope, I don't know. See, there's no way out of this, the cul-de-sac that we're stuck in with the internet, with outrage being like the all-important, the attention economy being the all-important currency. There's not really a way out of that.
I think there is, because this kind of leads to the other noticeable difference between Gamergate 1 and Gamergate 2, because almost from the onset, there is a much more pronounced attempt towards, reaching out not only to other gamers, but to other developers and others who are on the fence and whatnot. It's like, it's not batting down the hatches. It's not closing the doors. It's not absolute gatekeeping, as it were. Instead, there's a cautious hand reaching out that somehow we are not your enemy. We just like to play video games, and we want to help the video game industry thrive. I mean, Cabrutus is doing it. Even Mark Curd, to his credit, is actually doing his part in being more constructive and positive compared to before. It's just that, of course, that doesn't get as much attention as the outrage. And rather telling how Sargon, in his video on Gamergate 2, conveniently left Kern and Cabrutus out of the picture when describing how Gamergate 1 failed, or how Gamergate 2 can only succeed if somehow they stop doing, I just want to play video games. That misconstrues the whole point.
It does. I wonder if that's because he, in his own life, he's kind of moved it. Because he's had some interesting transformation. Because, like, GG,
that's
the first... GG the first time around was around the same time he was starting as a YouTuber. That was, I think, one of the first big things he talks about. So maybe that's also about, like, his own personal journey, less so than Gamergate. Where do you think all this is going to go? Does what's happened over the last month leave you more positive about the future? Less positive? Where do you think all this is headed?
I mean, it's still early to say how things will go. Maybe it'll be a repeat of Gamergate 1, only more farcical, like constant screaming, a perpetual culture war, essentially endless outrage and toxicity, and everyone loses. Or, alternatively, there is going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just going to take longer, because even as Mark Curd admitted, at minimum, it's going to take 3 years before the industry catches on, the AAA industry at any rate catches on to the fact that relying on DEI or ESG as a winning formula isn't exactly helping them at all. So in that, but in that meantime, or in the meantime, people are actively finding ways to make sure that the light at the end of the tunnel is going to be a reality. They're not just idly waiting or just saying, I just want to play video games. You have people doing their part, or at least trying to make that a reality.
Do you think the games industry will change or learn anything from this?
Not overnight, no. Barring some dramatic event or whatever, I would say it is going to take, I think as mentioned, at least 3 years. So it's going to be a bit of an endurance test. It's going to be, and many of the games that are already funded with DEI or ESG money, or many of the games that have already received quote-unquote consultancy from the likes of Sweet Baby Inc. and Black Girl Gamers and whatnot, are already down the pipeline. So it's going to be more of the same, at least for the immediate future.
Yeah, the hang time on some of these games, game development for a AAA game, I think average is now 6 years.
Yes, but by that very same token, that shouldn't be surprising. Like, this shouldn't be an excuse to blackpill or to somehow say the West has fallen or all this lost, or just simply resort to the usual culture war outrage baiting. No, I would say this is to be expected. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Well, that is way more positive than I started. I find all this stuff really interesting. Your writing is interesting. I appreciate the stuff you've written on these topics. I learned about Tijuana Bibles the other day when I was reading one of your old Quillette articles, and I didn't know what that was. It was fascinating.
Oh,
topic.
yes. Oh, yes. America had their own doujinshi, and it's a shame that, well, because partly of Disney, you won't see them again until the laws change.
Oh, yeah, no, copyright, all that kind of stuff is such a mess over here, such a mess. It's like, because like it used to be like life of the creator plus 7 years, and then Disney messed it with it so many times. It's like 70 years, I swear. I have to look at it. It's been a while since I took a media law class, but it's a mess. Carlos, I appreciate you meeting here with me to talk. The time differential was a bit of a pain. We made it work. You're a fine writer. I appreciate you trying to inject some wisdom into these topics, not just to peddle outrage or try to do what might be easier to help your writing career, but try to do the right thing. I try to do the own thing. I try to do that as well, but it isn't always easy, and it sure doesn't always reward lots and lots. But it's good to have people like you. It's good to have people like you because when people read your stuff, they know that they'll be more reliable. They're gonna say, "Oh, Carlos, he's just saying this because he wants you to click his. They want you to subscribe to his Substack." No, it's like Carlos writes this because he really believes it, and here are all the links, and there's so many links in your articles, which is good. I like that, and yeah, it's strong stuff. I highly recommend people if you are interested in the topic of Gamergate at all. Any of its facets, you go and you read Carlos's stuff. We'll have final word here. Carlos, what are some things you would like to leave with the folks? Then you can tie it off here by telling us where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on Substack, and you can also find my Substack's account on Twitter if you want to find out a little bit more and a little bit of side commentary on there. But all the same, I hope you enjoy what you find there, because I can guarantee you it's not going to be more of the same.
What's your Twitter handle? Like exactly?
CMDC PH Ramblings.
You guys should definitely check out his stuff. If you should go, you need more Twitter follows. You have a good Substack following, much better than mine, but you get some more Twitter follows because you're really good at what you do, Carlos. People should check you out. So definitely go and subscribe to his Twitter, people. Check out his Substack. What are your projects you're working on right now, Carlos? What are you going to be writing about next?
We're working on 2 articles right now. The most immediate one is about autism in the Philippines. It's actually a continuation of an earlier article about comparing the experience of Greta Thunberg and James Damore, the Google guy, and I want to see how does that apply? How does the issue of autism apply in the context of the Philippines, and what are the ramifications? Because I think it's important that you kind of mention that whole issue regarding disabilities in the US. Here in the Philippines, it's like in the context of autism, it's a lot more difficult because essentially the idea that somehow people with autism are somehow it's like the focal point of all the evils of the world. Like they are the most vulnerable to all the evils of the world, if you want to put it that way. And that's in a developed country, like say the Netherlands. Imagine that, multiply that a few times over in the context of the Philippines, where up until relatively recently, autism wasn't really much of a national concern at all. It was often dismissed or often left to private entities, or in some cases, just generally waved aside as, weird or, retarded or just broken.
That's interesting. I will definitely check that when it comes out. I don't know. This is a failing of mine about I don't know a lot of how disability is handled outside of like UK, Canada, United States. It is a hard thing. Like I could imagine that being a difficult thing. I know even disabilities, the way they're handled in Mexico, in many ways culturally, is much harsher than the US. So that'll be interesting to check out. Okay, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Carlos, for taking the time to come on the show today. It was a great discussion. Thank you again
Likewise.
to Yeah, no, I enjoy it. We'll have to have you on again sometime.
Thank you also.
By the way, to those who helped put the show together, of course, my editor, Chris, who makes me appear way more competent than I actually am. Chris Hollywoodkey is amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you to Baines Book Publishing, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, and of course, Young Voices, a journalism advocacy organization, for helping put this show together. That is much appreciated. And lastly, but most importantly, of course, to all of you, my viewers, my listeners, my audience. You guys are awesome. You're the reason why I keep doing this. So until next time, my friends, and you never know who might show up on the show. You don't know. They could be from any country, could be any side, could be any profession. You don't know who's going to show up next on CultureScape. So until next time, keep geeking out.